Welcome to Dog Day Afternoon. It's Wednesday, June 22nd. Another great day to make some bets. I am Gilles Gallant with FTNBets on a show powered by the FTN Network. I'm joined as always by producer extraordinaire DeQuan Young. Quan, one of my favorite events of the year coming up, the NBA draft, man. My question today is simple for you. If you were drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, would you bear hug Roger Goodell on the stage? Now, just keep in mind all the hard work that you put in your entire life, you know, the things that you had to sacrifice to get to this stage. And some of this is what fast food you eating that night to celebrate.
I would absolutely give
Put you
him
on
a
the
bear
spot.
hug. I'm talking about, like, I would probably break dance on the stage. There would be a Carlton dance that I pull out. We do a hammer dance, and then big scoop hug, because you know it's a celebration, bitches.
None of this. That would be,
yeah,
a
lot of that. Like, yeah, I wouldn't shy away from the hug. It'd be a celebratory event. So he's in for a big one. As far as fast food, man,
I want to know.
That's a tough
one.
Don't tell me
Filet-O-Fish. Don't tell me
everybody knows, if you follow me on Twitter, my affinity for Taco Bell. I some days I'll tweet out my survey on Mondays. Did Quan's fat ass eat Taco Bell? And a lot of the times, yes is the answer. We did an over under on how many chalupas I ate once. So it would absolutely be. It would probably be Taco Bell, just to celebrate that night. Just because I feel like Taco Bell, you know, it was in Demolition Man. That means it's the food of the future. So, you know, and we're starting to get those new Taco Bells that actually showed up in that movie. So the future is now, people. And you gotta go to Taco Bell, grab your chalupa, celebrate whatever it is. I hope who is it that is getting drafted or is gonna be drafted that's in the Taco Bell commercial? Or he got invited to the draft off of it?
I have no idea. I like to think I'm pretty on top of marketing and sponsorship. I did not realize somebody from Taco Bell
I'll look it up here.
Oh my God. All right. Well, Taco Bell it is. Load up, get the taco bowl, everything. And I think that's awesome, man. So we've got an awesome guest today, Quan. Someone who rarely does interviews, someone I've been a fan of since I've joined the betting space in 2017. It's Vegas Refund, and he's going to be coming on the show. We're going to talk NBA draft betting. He's been a go-to resource for me for NBA draft betting, especially over the last few years, and NFL draft betting as well. He's going to give us some ideas on strategy and tips and ways to approach it, and he'll be coming on in just a minute. But first, as always, before we get started, today's show is brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook, and if Caesars is available in your state, and you haven't signed up yet, now is the perfect time. You can use the promo code FTNBets15 or FTNBets15. Caesars will give you a $1,500 free bet just for signing up. The code is right there on the screen, FTNBets15. And sign up now with Caesars Sportsbook today. All right, now let's bring on the man of the hour.
Real quick, it's Johnny Davis from Wisconsin. That's who it is.
Why didn't I knew that. Oh, thank you for clarifying that, because I knew Johnny Davis. Thank you, Quan. This is why he's the producer of the show. He knows this stuff. So, give him a follow too, at Quantity Media. All right, now we're going to bring on the man of the hour here, somebody I've been a huge fan of for a while now. It is the Vegas Refund. VR, welcome to the show. Welcome to Dog Day Afternoon.
What is going on? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. And I want to get right to it because I want to talk about your NBA draft spreadsheet you have that is pinned to your Twitter profile that is at Vegas Refund, because it is literally a gold mine of information. Like you do something that I love to do with touchdown scores as well. Like you've been tracking the odds since the markets have opened. You're updating them as we go. And it's for every market, over under props, draft slots, like first overall pick odds, all the way to like fifth pick odds, consensus rankings for mock drafts. You did this as well for the NFL draft in April. So what I wanted to ask you right off the top is, what made you want to create this resource, and how has it helped you for betting on drafts?
So I started it for the NFL draft, honestly, say last year, which this year's version has been way better. And it really just came from like the grinding the mocks website. that wasn't updating as fast as I wanted it to, or as often as I wanted it to. So I just made my own. And then there just isn't a like true odd screen for draft over unders, which like at this point it's to our advantage. And how, I guess you could say, rabbit holey and crazy I get with this, it keeps me on top of things, where this like odd screen definitely helps everyone, but at the same time, like updating each book as the day goes on totally keeps me on top of it, and it's just become my process. It definitely
Absolutely.
is, between the mock draft, EDP, the big board, and the dash. Like, it's definitely at this point somewhat of a well-oiled machine. Everyone should be using it, making their own. You're welcome if you don't. You just don't use this. But
no, man, it's awesome, and it's something that again I'm using more as like a point of reference to kind of see where I'm at with odds and where they're going, and kind of the progression of the line history, which I think is really important. And it's kind of like I said, it's something that I tend to do with touchdown scores as well at FTNBets.com, where I'm kind of tracking the week to week odds, so I can kind of see what are the odds telling me and kind of the direction that it looks. But I wanted to ask you specifically about the consensus rankings you have for each player, and how it pertains to mock drafts. So you have the consensus rankings for every guy, pretty much 1 through 20, and it's a weighted average for each player's draft position. So you have probably 18, I think 19 mock drafts. For example, Jabari Smith is the consensus ranked first because he's not really below 2 in any mock draft that's really out there. But what I wanted to know about mock drafts is, like, for example, Benedict Mathurin is somebody that we talked about off air, and I've been kind of tweeting about it, has gotten a lot of steam to be picked 5th overall, especially over the last 48 hours after some mocks came out with him in that spot at pick number 5. Like for example, he was plus 1,000 in that spot, now down to plus 180 as we're doing this show. So I wanted to know from your perspective, how much do you find like recent or mock drafts in general influence the markets and betting habits for the NBA draft?
So I'm gonna be comparing it to the NFL draft a bunch because it is the same process, but there are like different things about it. Where the NFL draft, there's like a couple mock draft websites that like grade each mock draft after the fact, and you can historically see who is the best at mocking and who isn't, which makes it very easy to pinpoint who you want to factor in to the aggregate. But the NBA draft doesn't have anything like that. And then when you factor in just all of like less info, especially this year, in terms of like a time frame, the struggle is pinpointing like what mock drafts you want to use. Like there's my core 5, which are like Wasserman, Givney, Vicini, Wu, and O'Connor. And then there's everyone else. And I honestly have no idea historically if they've done well or they haven't. Which brings me to like basically going through the mock drafts, and you kind of just have to judge them without a bias, because there's a bias where like a mock draft is good if it aligns with your bets, but it stinks if it doesn't. Where there was one I added a couple days ago, I think it was Harper, and he had like Jaden Ivey at number 9, and I was actually entering it. I was like, okay, this is solid. And then he has Ivy at 9, which I totally didn't even realize because I just default to 4 at this point. And I ended up deleting on that first because it was like, this guy's off the rails. Like, this is just not, like, we don't want to be too off market or too crazy, but you can be a little bit. And I ended up adding him because I had him last year and I do respect him, but that's definitely the struggle. Where I just went on a tangent. I don't even remember the question, but
No. I was asking like mock drafts, and just more like I find the betting public, like those core 5 that you had mentioned, they would see a draft come out, and Benedict Mathurin, for example, is at 5, but his odds are at plus 1,000, and those odds immediately steam, even though we're not necessarily in the draft room or talking to Detroit Pistons draft decision makers, but that's what I'm saying, is that sometimes the betting public, they'll kind of gravitate to those core guys. And I'm wondering, is that something that you play into your bets? And it sounds like it does.
So there's definitely guys for the NFL that blow it up, but for this year, when O'Connor releases a mock, it seems to have moved things the most. I haven't really noticed it for any other guys. Like earlier this week, I think Vicini and Givney released their mocks at the same time. I think it was yesterday, which between those two, would assume it moved it a little. It wasn't anything crazy, but there was one mock that O'Connor had, I want to say last week, that a bunch of things like exploded off of him, which I was just assuming it was off of him. There's nothing saying that like he released his mock, these lines are moving. It could have been a coincidence, but he seems to be the one that moves it. But there are definitely some, and then some that don't. It's way more relevant for the NFL though. Like when Schrager or I'm drawing a blank, the other NFL network.
Yeah, but I get you. The mock draft analysts for NFL, the big ones.
Yeah.
The guys who are really plugged in.
Right.
But and that's good. And that's good information to know, because sometimes maybe there are guys that maybe you can lean your trust in from a betting perspective more so than others. And because not every mock draft is created equal. And then, of course, as well, some guys are more plugged in than others. But let's talk about the first overall pick odds, because this is one where I'm not really sure if anybody is kind of plugged into what the Magic are planning to do here, even though the odds do indicate that it seems like that Jabari Smith is going to be the pick. He's pretty much been the odds-on favorite since the market opened. But the odds really over the last month since the market is open, and really just coming up to today, they're shifting daily, and it seems like hourly for the first overall pick odds. And, I saw at some sites, for example, Jabari Smith up to minus 450, maybe even minus 500 when the market opened. And then at one point a couple of weeks ago, it was down to like maybe minus 140. We're getting back up now to minus 240. At this stage, do you think it's pretty much a done deal that Jabari is going first overall to the Magic, especially now when you're seeing, Paulo ranking up now and actually surpassing Chet Holmgren as the second likeliest player to go first overall?
Yeah, I mean, gun to head, I would say like it's Jabari, just purely based off of how tight knit things are. But at the same time, like all the reports came out yesterday saying like all the experts were saying everything we're hearing, we'd be so shocked if it wasn't Jabari. Which at like what point do these guys like realize that they're all talking to the same sources? But this order, I would say, is accurate and should have been the accurate order, like Jabari, Paulo, Chet from the start. But I do think it's more up in the air than everyone thinks, and that's speaking from someone who has Paulo shares from last week. I would. Oh my God, if Paulo went number one, but.
I mean, he was upwards of like plus 1,200, like just only like a few days ago. And then Steam, again, just kind of moving in with a lot of people talking to these decision makers. So that makes me wonder about the top three pick order, because let's just say barring any trades, like right now, I mean, to do this exercise, if you start incorporating trades, it almost just makes my head hurt. But let's just say barring any trades, the latest betting odds are telling you that it's essentially going to be Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, and Paulo Banchero as going 1, 2, and 3. Do you think it's just that simple, that that's the way that the top three is going to unfold? Or do you think there's maybe another player that could sneak into the top three, a la Jaden Ivey, or maybe a Keegan Murray? And then also for Chet, is there maybe even potential that he could drop out of the top three because of some, rumblings of injury concern?
I think the top three are pretty set. Where I hate talking trades too, but in terms of like a scenario where let's just say Paulo goes one, like then the Rockets they're hitting eject, which then you would assume that they do everything that they can to trade out. But the scenario that's most interesting to me is the Rockets apparently are totally all in on Paulo. Like I think they might have even only worked him out, where them trading up to one, because they do have assets, which I know is crazy, like makes a lot of sense, which then Orlando can just take, let's just say Chet at 3, which who knows, that could have been the plan the whole time. But there's so many different trade scenarios, and every podcast and this has nothing to do with this, but every podcast that I'm listening to right now, whether it's Simmons or whatever, they're all talking trades, and it's killing me.
And it could very well happen. It's just more from a mock draft perspective, or even a betting perspective. You'd be more likely just to try to see if you could find a prop for a top three pick trade or something like that, more so than just picking a wild card team to kind of trade up to the top three. It's not like the NFL draft where a team will trade up to get a quarterback or something like that, and mortgage their future. I'm not really sure because in the NBA, if you're that bad and you mortgage the future, you better hope that guy comes in and at least gets you to 500, because otherwise you're going to be picking in the lottery again, and that pick isn't going to be yours. And then you have limited ways to improve. The Chet rumblings, though, this is the one thing that, like, we talked about this off air, and, Chet is just such a unicorn and just doesn't really have a lot of basketball comparisons of what people could say. Like, I mean, obviously he has like almost like the body type of like Sean Bradley, but they're completely different players. But the point is, do you think there is any potential of Chet dropping out of the top 3, or do you think it's going to be a done deal that he's definitely getting taken in the top 3?
I mean, there are some really hot takes about the medical red flags, which if like they do become true, specifically to what like these tinfoil hat rumblings are, like it makes him like almost undraftable, to be honest, for what it would be. I bought into it in terms of getting involved, in terms of having shares, but it's just crazy to think that he would fall out of the top 3. I have him at 4 and
like
5,
I mean, he's
though,
minus
so.
200 to go second overall too. Like, it's crazy. Like, but continue. Just again, the injury concerns. I'm almost kind of wondering if it's just because you look at his body shape and body type that you just wonder if he's even going to be able to hold up to any type of physicality. But it seems like, though, even in college basketball, like he was still doing stuff, even though he was limited physically, where he was still impacting games. I just find that if there is medical concerns, kudos to his agent, because he has kept that under wraps so well, to the point where you would think that it would have leaked already from, Woj or, Shams or somebody kind of leaking that there is like, some sort of red flag for him to drop out of the top 3.
Oh, did you watch that Woj thing last night on ESPN?
I missed it. What happened?
Oh my God. It was just awful. It was just the worst thing ever. So I don't mean to go off.
Was he blaming sports betting for something happening again?
No, the ESPN had a mock draft show special at 10 p.m. Eastern, which was a wild time. And looking forward to, which I don't know if I was the only one thinking this. And I was literally sitting on a prop all day waiting for this Woj show, thinking that Woj was going to have a mock draft. And I was actually adding this mock draft into my doc as it was happening. And then halfway through, I realized, or someone told me that they're just going over giving these mock drafts, and it's not even Woj's. And all they did was talk about. It was just such a disappointment. But sorry.
And I mean, with what? No. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of draft content out there right now, whether it be from here or places that you're representing as well, and just. It's key to kind of know that, of kind of what information is good, what information is bad, what's hollow, what's solid. And, if you're watching that draft last night, obviously I think Woj is probably, him and Shams are probably the most plugged in guys like in the NBA. But if you're just going to go over Cavoni's draft, like, that's kind of,
But
it doesn't sound like must see TV.
There is a balance I was discussing with a buddy actually this morning. And he brought up how disconnected the media is and how they really have no clue. But at the same time, if the media was more connected to what was going on, we would have props that would be minus 1,000 everywhere. And there would be no edges or any angles to take, because we would just know, and we probably wouldn't even be able to bet on the draft. So like the gray area is very advantageous to us, even though everyone wants to know what's going on. But not knowing what's going on allows us to bet into the market.
So let's talk about some of that information then, and just specifically where it comes to some of the over/under props that you've bet. Now, these bets are listed at your bet tracker, whether it be on the Action app, for example, or also in your spreadsheet. But you have right now 11 over/under props for player draft position, based on what I was just seeing. You might have more by the time draft time comes, but some of them have seen some pretty big draft slot movements since you posted them, like to both the Twitter and your spreadsheet. Like, what are some of the players that you've seen pick up some major steam since you posted those bets, or some of the guys that have maybe fallen off a cliff, as far as where their draft projection was concerned?
So Jalen Williams is definitely the hot name right now in terms of stock, where he opened, I want to say, at, which I could actually tell you because I do know. He opened at 23.5.
Wasn't it? Yeah, 23. Great. Yeah.
And he's down to 15.5 in some places, which I've brought it up on other shows. He's very similar to Durante last year, where the media just nailed it, and his stock was sizzling, and his over/under just kept dropping and dropping and dropping, and every under still hit. He ended up going like 13 or 14 to the Pacers, which
Mhm.
this feels very similar in terms of comparing that to a player where Jalen Williams is sizzling. In terms of my bets, who's hot? I mean, they're all going to move, unfortunately, which is a problem after you bet it with how sensitive the market is. But Ochai is the one that I'm like on the fence about. I'm very happy at 15.5. At like the 13, what is he now? Oh, he's not even on the screen, so I can discuss those. But at 13.5
No,
for
no, but
5
Agbaji is a good example of a senior, for example, like of where his draft slot may go because of the thinking of that these GMs are always trying to maximize long-term potential. And him sitting right there at the 15.5 mark, I think it's a pretty sharp line because I'm wondering if teams are going to be maybe a little hesitant to want to draft him just because of the fact of his age.
right, and it's 13.5 now, which that would probably be an overplay. 14 is definitely the key number where when I made the bet, I knew that the Cavs loved him, hoping they still do. But a couple others, I put Jovic out last night, which he's absolutely
Saw
tanking.
that.
I would still play that at 21.5. He is. I hope he goes undrafted. Well, actually, I don't hope for his own sake. But at this point, he is falling out of the first round in some mocks, which it when all the he's been like a 2-week process for me, which when all the over-unders came out, I want to say like a week and a half ago, I was actually in New York at a wedding. And they come out, which you can't bet props in New York. And they come out, I see them on my phone, and I am on full tilt. Like I had been waiting for these. And normally I can just text my brother who lives in New Jersey too, who of course wasn't home either. He was actually out of the country. So I was like totally like blocked out from these props, and usually I hit openers the second that they come out. And Jovic was the one that caught my eye, which was like 24.5 or 23.5. And then I get back into New York, and I was just staring at him. He was at 20, I think, 20.5, or excuse me, New Jersey. And I was just looking for a reason to do it, and I ended up holding off. And at this point, being in New York at that time, because I definitely would have put under 23.5 out, or even maybe under 20, if I could have, because I'm not going to put out anything I can't bet myself. I would have put out the under, which I would have been regretting right now, because he's totally an overplay at this point. But
Okay, yeah, and all I could think to myself right now when you were talking about you're at a wedding is just like, and does anybody object to the? And you just are like, wait, I gotta go to New Jersey, I gotta place the bet. Just wait, I'll be right back.
God,
Oh, that would be
I
amazing.
was if
Were you standing in the
my
wedding?
no, but it was a life choice. I mean, if it was the NFL, I would have come back. I mean, I was on full tilt. My wife was like yelling at me. I don't care about basketball. I was like, okay, but you don't get
Well, then
it.
you clearly don't want to make money. Yeah, no, I get that too. I get, so no harm, no foul on that. You're still able to kind of get the Jovic bet in. But again, just putting up, Quan, can you put that slide back up again? Because Jalen Williams is the guy that I'm actually really interested in because you said 23.5, and then he moved to 20.5, now down to 15.5. And for a guy that, especially when you're looking at the lottery, a guy that probably played maybe one nationally televised game playing at Santa Clara. Like, again, just the general public doesn't really know much about him. And that's kind of one of those bets where when I see you kind of place that kind of bet where I'm just like, man, he must know something that I don't because I barely know anything about him. But then you're seeing some content like, come out over the last 48 hours, whether it be coaches, or insiders or whatever saying like Jalen Williams is totally a lottery pick, like that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if that kind of content and that kind of message is a part of the reason why you're seeing this draft slot just drop and drop and drop.
Yeah, I guess it's somewhat of a group thing and how sensitive the lines are where he was one that caught my eye when I couldn't bet it. And the only reason I didn't bet it earlier at a better number was like the principle in the back of my head was like dying. I could have had 23.5, but now I can only have 20. I'm glad I did. But I mean, right now, and I have a separate doc where I just enter in different numbers. Right now at 15.5, where is it? 15.5, the over hits at, or excuse me, 15.5, the under hits at 47%, 18.5, it's at 63%. So like that's 16 seems to be the key number, which a lot of mocks are in that range. But yesterday, the core guys, which I value more, like the Giveneys, had him at like 14, which all the unders would hit. So it's definitely like at this point, I probably wouldn't play it. But if you're gonna play it, just hit the under and hope he goes 14 because I mean he is hot. So like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, if anything with him, like the one thing I love about Jalen is like the more steam that picks up on him, like there's a very high likely chance like that he might even, I mean, maybe teams start to panic and maybe he could sneak his way into the top 10 just to kind of blow everybody away. And that's kind of what made me want to think about the top 10 pick market, because it's a very popular market in betting circles right now, just because of the fact that you can potentially get, a guy with half decent value that maybe a team is valuing more so than what we're looking at or the mock drafters are looking at, where they think like a guy like Jeremy Sochan is their guy, but they're picking 12th. So they make a deal with the team that's in 9th or 10th. And you just, or even the teams that are picking like 9th and 10th could use a guy like a Johnny Davis or a Jeremy Sochan or Ousmane Dieng. And got a lot of NBA analysts that are high on guys like a Bill Simmons or, on like Jeremy Sochan from Baylor or Dieng from France. And they both have plus odds. And I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, like, do you think either of these guys has a real shot to crack the top 10? Or is, from based on these odds of what we're citing here, is there another player that maybe we should be considering is that somebody has like an outside chance? I'm kind of out on AJ Griffin at this point. I just kind of seen his odds drop and drop and drop. There's been reports of a knee injury that might be a concern as well. So based on the list here, or even just anybody else, is there anybody that you're thinking for a top 10 pick market that maybe could be a half decent value here?
I mean, so when I'm betting the NBA draft or any draft, like, I'm way more hesitant. This is personal preference, as there's nothing like math behind this. But when it's plus money, like I'm way more hesitant to bet a worse line than I could have had at plus money. Where like Dieng was plus 450 on Monday, we're at 150. Like I'm just hesitant. I don't bother. Where if it was like minus 140. I could have had minus 140 and now it's like minus 170. Like it doesn't matter to me, generally speaking. But Dieng would probably be the only one out of that bunch that I would say is worth it. So Sochan, you're better off just betting under 12. Where Dieng, I think he's at like 11.5 right now, which it seems like he's either going to go like 8, 9, or 13, or maybe even before that. But
and even AJ Griffin, for example, like a guy that was, probably considered a top 5 pick entering the college basketball season, a highly touted recruit going to Duke. And we've just seen his odds drop and drop and drop. So you would think like some bettors who might just be kind of approaching the draft props initially, they would look at it and be like, wait a minute, AJ Griffin at plus 200, he's an awesome player. I'm going to bet on him. Right. Whereas you're saying, no, you could have had that at plus 120. Now it's up to like plus 200 at this spot. When the odds are reversing and not in your favor in that spot, it's actually a bad thing comparatively to reversing the other way. Is that kind of the sum up on that?
It's just a personal preference, where you're not going to. It's a personal preference because the movement has just been really just purely based off of like who's betting it with how sensitive it is, where like the true odds are probably closer to plus like 450 for Dieng, where it's at plus 160 now. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. It's just a personal preference, but Sochan definitely under 12 over top 10. Dieng, I would rather bet the top 10 than under 11.5 for sure.
And see, I'm the guy who is going to take the risk at plus 150 and take Sochan, only just because, and again, this is part of the thing that I would actually advise not against. Like, this is the only bet that I'm doing this with. The other ones I'm feeling pretty confident in because of the line movement in my favor. But the main tip, I think, we're not GMs and teams aren't going to pick based on what we would do. So don't bet based on what you would do. Like that's actually probably the worst strategy that you could have, because even though I think Jeremy Sochan is a top 10 player in this draft, that may not necessarily be the consensus thought of decision makers who are making these picks. So that's one of the things. Do you kind of agree with that theory that just like, don't pick or don't make bets the way that you would pick and build a team?
Oh yeah, I mean that it's yes, that is 100% the number one rule. And when I tell people that, sometimes I feel bad because I'm so blunt and they take offense to it. But like, we're not the general managers. We're not making the decisions. Our opinion like literally means nothing. The key, you have to picture yourself as you work for TMZ, and you just have to figure out what the front office is looking to do and do whatever it takes. That's essentially your only job. And you can bet on information. There's no risk on, you could have the perfect bet on an NFL game and the quarterback can get hurt on the first play in that perfect read. It goes to shit. Where there are very few variables like that can screw a draft bet if you do the research, you figure it out, and you're confident. Where a trade is really the only thing which you can't bank on. Goodell just had to take that card and walk to the podium and read the name off, and you're good. So
I love that, and I like the idea of a TMZ of sports betting. I think that's a $1 million idea.
Yeah, the TMZ is crazy. Like, I mean, and that's how they find everything. Like, it's insane. Which that's what we got to do, I guess you could say. That was a great comparison. Well, that was on the cusp.
No, I love that, and I'm pretty much I'm going to be putting an IP in on that very soon to be able to develop that. Specifically, we're going to be tracking cappers and just watching what they do and just being on top of them as well. But let's move over to, this is going to be the last question for me today because I think you've been awesome today, just very valuable information. But this is a question, a personal question of mine, but just also I think some people who are kind of new to betting this market. How do you approach betting on guys that played in the G League, or a guy like a Jaden Hardy and Dyson Daniels are the two biggest examples in this, but also like a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, who we don't really have a lot of intel and reporting on, just because it could be quite limited with the fact that, you're playing in the G League. Those games aren't like always nationally televised. And, that the game tape isn't necessarily readily available the way that like a nationally televised college basketball game would be. So in an example of Shaedon Sharpe, you're watching all these guys that potentially could be picked ahead of him. We've seen those guys play on the biggest stage of their career so far multiple times, whereas Shaedon Sharpe, we're just kind of banking on the idea that, well, he was one of the top consensus high school players and was going to play with Kentucky. It just didn't work out. What I'm wondering from your perspective is, how do you approach betting on guys like that for their over-under props because of the lack of intel and reporting and just the fact that there's just a lack of game tape available to the public?
Which, I mean, so that kind of just goes back to our last point, which like the G League doesn't matter to me. Whatever college or like, feel like that would be an opinion, but guys like Sharpe, like you kind of just have to read everything, of course. But like Sharpe was the number one high school recruit, I think, coming out, which like historically the number one high school recruit has like crushed it in the NBA, like guaranteed success almost. Where
and at least those are the from a top pick too.
Right, which those are the types of things that like you can like factor in, that like a general manager is gonna be drooling over his athleticism based off of something like that and reach on a guy like Sharpe. Where like, the G League, honestly, it doesn't seem like there is less info on the G League guys, which might be surprising. There aren't as many. And the only G League guys usually you have to worry about are guys going in the top 10, which they'll have just as much. But
no, and that's good. That's good. It's good to know because, again, like I find comparatively to, let's just use Jabari and Chet and Paulo, like those guys have been dissected in and out by, it seems like, every single person who has an opinion on the NBA draft. Whereas like a guy like Jaden Hardy, who might be picked in the 20s, like there's just not as much information that's readily available comparatively to a lot of the guys that we. So that was, to me, I'm very curious. Like, how do you approach an over-under prop like that? But that's pretty much it, man. I think you've been awesome today. Before we go, again, I want to thank you again for coming on Dog Day Afternoon. And before we go as well, can you tell the folks who are watching about where we can find your work, what you've got coming up, and, what's on the horizon for Vegas Refund?
Wow, I get my own shout out. Thank you. I've never gotten this, which this is like my 4th show ever. But yeah, Twitter, Action Network. I track all the plays if you're into the tracking. But after this, we'll probably be in a little bit of a hibernation, and then NFL is actually way closer than we think. I'll have
It's like 75 days or something like that. Like I
Yep.
can't even remember. I can't keep track.
I'll have the fantasy football doc up in August, very similar to the draft I had last year, and then we will be full steam into NFL college. But yeah, I mean, I started this Twitter like a few years ago, free the entire time, connected to 0 entities. So it's just a fun hobby for me, and doing things like this are making it even more fun. So thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you, man. And I've been like, since I joined Twitter officially, like as a content creator back in 2017, like you were like one of my first follows and somebody that I was always kind of like, I may not necessarily agree with all the picks, but it's one of those people where I'm just like, I want to know what he's thinking just so that way I can, not necessarily for group speak, but just I like to see sometimes of, am I on the right track? You know, and just with your pattern of success, it's paid off dividends. So I appreciate that a lot, man.
Do I drive you crazy when I post the NFL plays on Sundays at an hour before kickoff?
Not necessarily, but at the same. No. If anything, it depends on what your edge is. If you're waiting for a line and something like that, then of course. But again, I'm not really the type of person who's following people specifically just to wait on their plays. But at the same time, if I've got to play, like because the way that I actually first found you was first touchdown scorer bets. Yeah, that was the one thing that initially brought me in. I was like, oh my God, this guy is crushing it every primetime game. And then eventually I tried to see if I could tailor it because I was mainly doing anytime touchdown scorer bets. And it just wasn't, I wasn't very prominent at that time. But then I got on a nice little streak and started winning. But that's one of the things that where I was like, wow, like look at him. He's doing first touchdown scorer bets back in 2017. Like nobody was posting props. Like it was just a completely different landscape back then. And then I started kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe I could do my anytime touchdown score bets. So in a way, you kind of inspired me to do that.
Man,
so
great.
Again, that's awesome, man. So
I wish I could still post the first touchdown because they were so much fun. But then people started treating them like they were like actual plays, where if like a 20-1 first touchdown didn't hit, I was like getting trolled. So it was like, okay, this is over. Like,
yeah, this is the life I lead. Unfortunately, like, I'll put a bet out for like a plus 1,200 anytime touchdown bet, and they're like, you're a fraud. And when it loses, and I'm like, I'm sorry, like I mean, we still hit the plus 300. Sorry, guys, like I can't really hit all of them.
Twitter is what have you done for me today?
Well,
Twitter is
not
what
even
have you
today,
done for me today?
Yeah, even like the last hour sometimes, especially on football Sundays. All right, man. Well, we're going to wrap up here. No show on Friday. I'm going to be taking a nice little long weekend, a little bit of a break. We'll be back next Wednesday on FTN Network. Another special guest. We'll probably have some more picks. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at GDawg5000. Make sure to follow him at Vegas Refund so you can get this information. Again, it's all free. Very valuable resource. I want to thank everybody for watching Dog Day Afternoon. Bon chance.